In this video, we're going to discuss the concept of threshold. This may be a term that you've come across in terms of your horse or your dog training, but how often do we ever think about our own threshold and our comfort zones and whether or not we actually listen to those? So I'm going to start off, first of all, by explaining the comfort zone, the stretch zone, and the uncomfortable zone. So this might be something that you've heard of before. So what happens when we're in the comfort zone? Well, we're doing things that we, as the name suggests, comfortable with, and we feel pretty happy doing it. So what's the physiological effects of the comfort zone? Well, we're nice and calm, which means that we can listen, we can learn, we're able to concentrate, and it almost feels as though you've got the time to think. So you really sort of can almost, well, I can almost hear my thoughts and sort of I'm really thinking and processing the information. However, as I start to move up into the uncomfortable zone, for me anyway, the exact opposite happens. So my brain almost leaves my body and I can't think at all. So the physiological effects of being in this zone are shallow breathing, increased heart rate, actually stop listening. So somebody can be trying to teach me and trying to help me and I'm just like, the light's on but there's nobody home, because you can't process information in the same way as you can over in the comfort zone. You can't concentrate and you're very much in this freeze, fight or flight mode. And I think it's the freeze element of it that really sort of stops the thinking and the being able to process the information. So why is it important then that we recognise this? Well, for starters, it's really important because, as we've said, if you're in the uncomfortable zone, not only is that really trying to tell you that you're in a potentially dangerous situation, but you also can't learn when you're in that zone. When your horse is in that zone, they can't learn either. So, first of all, before we do any of our training, we need to actually find a baseline. We need to find where our zones are, our comfort zones, our stretch zones, and our uncomfortable zones. So what kind of things make us feel comfortable? So these are some ideas. So imagine that it's a sunny day. Imagine that you've got lots of time. Let's make this a little bit smaller and then we can see it properly. Imagine that you've got a familiar horse. You're doing a familiar task. You're in a familiar location. And in that familiar location, you're in a particular area that feels safe. So there might be, for example, one end of the arena where you feel safer, or in an indoor, something like that. You might have lots of peace and quiet. You might be feeling calm and content with the way that everything's going at home or at work, which means that you're nice and relaxed. And you might just be working in the lower gate. So all these things ensure that we stay nicely into our comfort zone. So here we are. So we might then have some triggers that start to move this arrow back up here. So it might be something like the wind and the rain. You're feeling tired and poorly. You're upset or frustrated. You've just had an argument with somebody at home. You move to a new location. You're rushing. On top of that, you're trying to do a new task with your horse, something that you've never done before. There's noise, distractions. It might be a new horse, or you might be working at a higher gate. So as those triggers start to stack up, you start to move further and further and further over here. So we can ask ourselves, what can we control? What can we control? So we can't control the wind and the rain. We potentially can control the location. We might not be able to control rushing if we've suddenly got to get something done before school pickup, for example. But then we could choose a familiar task. So don't do something new when you're pushed for time. We might not be able to control the noise and the distractions, but again, in that case, we could control something like the task or choose a location that feels safe. So what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to pause the video in a minute, and I want you to write down comfort zone. So I want you to start off just thinking about the area that you normally work, and I'll give you an example. So where I work at home, I've got an area of the arena where there's chickens who are often flapping. It's further away from the fields and the rest of the horses, so they can get a little bit more tense down there. So that would probably be, if I had to map out the area where I work in terms of these comfort zones, it would probably be moving more over here into the uncomfortable zone. The other end, the top end of the arena, feels safer. It's quite sheltered from the barn. It's near the other horses in the field, so I feel happier there. If I want to feel even happier still, so maybe a new horse or wind and rain or lots of noise going on, I actually work on the hard standing on the yard right outside the barn. So that is something that I can control. I can manipulate that variable according to what else is going on that I can't control. So write down where you feel safe and where starts to make you feel a little bit more uncomfortable. Then write down tasks. So what do you feel really familiar with? So I'll give you another example from my experience. So my pony that I work with has been lunged all his life. He's very familiar with it. He's very happy with it. He understands it perfectly. So if I've worked on something really new the day before, or something that he might have found had pushed him a little bit, the day after, I might want to go back to something that he feels really super comfortable with again, so that we can all get our confidence. And the opposite end of the extreme is when I'm working at Liberty and I have to get them working really close to me, but they're not on a lead rope or anything, and I'm running backwards and they're coming towards me. That feels, for me, that's really, really, really pushing up here into my, certainly the top end of my stretch zone. So what I'm not going to do is, I'm probably not going to do that if it's windy and rainy and there's lots of noise, if the kids are playing and the dogs are barking. I'm probably going to choose to do that on a day where there's peace and quiet. I'm not rushing. So again, that's another way of manipulating those variables. So in the next video, we're going to look at acute fear, chronic fear, and the impact that that has on our comfort zones and threshold, and why it's so important to what I call respect the threshold.